Now that I've created my user interface, it's time to start adding code and actually make this app do something, actually make it work. So to do that, the first thing we want to do is hide this window here by clicking on this button and find the two circles in the top right. That's called the Assistant Editor, and it's going to give us a split screen like this. Okay. So we're going to be working under the class view controller. And the first line of code that we're going to write is we're actually going to build a scoreboard. Because as people take the test, we're going to be keeping score. So to do that, you create what's called a variable, var, and then name it scoreboard. And right off the bat, at the beginning of the game, we're going to set that equal to 0. Okay. Now what we need to do is our buttons for each question, we need to add that to our code, basically telling our app that when certain buttons are pressed, we want to add points to our scoreboard variable. But before we begin, let's talk a little bit about our questions and our responses here. We're going to assume that high score wins, but looking at each question and response, there's going to be some responses that award 0 points. Now, I could add those buttons into the code and just say to add 0 points to the scoreboard. For this app, I'm going to say we're just going to leave them out. We're going to do nothing with those buttons. If it adds 0, we're not going to even put it in our code at all, just to keep things nice and simple. When the user presses on those buttons, it's going to blink at them. They're going to think that something is happening in the background, when in actuality, nothing is. So for instance, with the first question, no, we're just going to leave that out of our code. Seldom with the second one, that's just not going to be added to our code. So we're just going to add only those buttons that add points to the scoreboard. All right, so to do this, we'll start with our first question. Do you use Google Drive? Yes is the one that adds points, so I'm going to click on it. Find your control key on your keyboard, press and hold control, then click and drag, and I'm going to put that underneath the scoreboard. And we're going to make this into an action. And I'm going to name it question 1 yes. And notice how I'm naming this. Question does not get capitalized, but 1 and yes, the first letters do. This is called camel case, and it makes code easier to understand and to read. Also notice how I'm being very descriptive by saying question 1 yes. I'm not just saying yes. When you write code, you want to be descriptive, because this is a simple app, but other apps you're going to have thousands of lines of code, so you want to know what you're talking about. So I'm just going to connect that. Okay. So what this action says is when question 1 yes is pressed, and below here we have to specify what we want to happen. So I want the scoreboard to add a point, which I'm going to type like this: scoreboard plus or equal to 1. And that's going to add a point to scoreboard and save it. So now I need to go down the line. Second question, we'll start with frequently. Make it an action. Question 2, frequently. Connect it. Now this is our multiple choice question. So rather than just adding a single point, frequently is actually going to add 2 points, which means I need to code for somewhat. Hold down control, drag, making an action. We'll name it question 2 somewhat. And that's going to add 1 point to the scoreboard. Okay, question 3. No is the one that actually awards the point. So again, control drag. Question 3, no. That just adds 1 point. In this case, question 4, read it. Gets us the point. Oops. And I kind of made a mistake here. Rather than an action, I did an outlet, so I need to delete it. Make that an action. That will give the scoreboard 1 point. In this case, Google a solution gets us a point, and that's question 5. Oops. Question 5, Google. Okay, so just like that, finish up coding all the buttons for your questions, and then in the next segment we'll talk about how we can code for the submit button, the verdict display, the image here, and the reset button as well.